Libra? There's a name you haven't written down anywhere, but your body remembers it better than any date. You may have forgotten the exact scent of the cologne, the color of the shirt, even some of the phrases you exchanged. But there's a sound, a way of being close, that still lives somewhere inside you, playing softly whenever someone gets too close and doesn't touch that right spot. You've probably wondered why this person, specifically this one, and not the others, who seemed more right on paper, more beautiful, more available, easier to explain to the family, and yet it's her name that comes up when everything is quiet. This isn't about lost romance. It's about something stranger, more silent, that Libra has always carried without realizing it. You've spent your whole life tuning your sound to the sound of others. You walk into a room, and without realizing it, you've already calculated what part of me fits here, what tone avoids friction, what this person needs to hear now to continue liking me. This isn't weakness. It's an ancient, almost perfect mechanism built to avoid the only thing Libra fears more than being wrong: open conflict, irreversible rejection. The problem is that an instrument that constantly tunes itself for others forgets, over time, what its own original note was. You've learned to adapt so well that you may no longer know for sure when you're being genuine and when you're just playing the role the situation demands. And that's exactly why that person haunted you in a different way, because near them, for the first time, the mechanism simply didn't engage. You didn't gauge the tone. You didn't measure the right distance. You didn't rehearse the version of yourself that would be most acceptable there. You just existed. It's strange to think about it now, because at the time you didn't even realize the magnitude of what was happening. It seemed simple. It seemed too easy to be important. It was only later, when the absence arrived, that the silence of that effort that never existed became the loudest noise you've ever heard. You try to understand rationally. You go over the conversations, look for what made that person different from the others. But the answer isn't in any sentence they said. It's in something simpler and more unsettling. Around them, you didn't need to translate yourself to be understood. Think about how many people have passed through your life demanding, without saying it aloud, a slightly edited version of you. A little less intense here, a little more available there, a little easier, lighter, more like what they expected to find. You delivered these versions with such competence that no one, not even you, realized the price. And suddenly someone appears who didn't ask for any of those edits. And your body, which lives in a state of silent alert, relaxed in a way you didn't know was possible. This wouldn't have meant so much if it hadn't happened right in the middle of your entire life spent adjusting to others. But it happened there, exactly at that point, when you were already tired without knowing it, when the performance weighed more than you admitted. Perhaps that's why this person's memory doesn't function like other memories. It doesn't weaken with time, as faces and voices do. It remains a point of reference, like the note to which everything else has come to be compared, even unintentionally. And that's where the discomfort lies, the discomfort you probably never put into words. Do you really miss her, or do you miss the only version of yourself that appeared when she was around? It's a question that bothers me because it doesn't have an easy answer, and maybe you've been carrying it with you without ever having said it out loud to anyone. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose isn't about winning back someone who's gone, nor about romanticizing a longing that has already served its purpose. It's about something rarer, how a Libra recognizes, on their own internal frequency, without needing another person as a tuning fork to know if they're in tune. It's a resource built for those who have already understood, even if only halfway, that true balance isn't about pleasing those around you. It's about not losing yourself trying to do so. And if you've made it this far still with this discomfort active, still dwelling on that name, that memory, that feeling that won't go away, perhaps that's exactly the sign that this part of your story is still asking to be understood now, while it still hurts enough to move you, before it becomes just another meaningless, stored memory. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And in the meantime, tell me in the comments, when was the last time you felt like you didn't need to adjust for someone to like you? There's a type of exhaustion that doesn't come from bad sleep. It comes from years of interpreting with almost invisible perfection the score that everyone around you expected to hear. You learned to read an audience before you learned to know yourself. And you did it so well that nobody noticed, not even you, how much energy was being drained just to keep everything in harmony. Think about how many times in any given conversation you felt an opinion rise in your throat and chose, almost without thinking, to swallow it again. Not because it was wrong, but because disagreeing at that moment seemed to cost more than it was worth. You did the math, quickly, silently, and chose the path that preserved peace. You did this so many times that you stopped realizing you were choosing. Every time you avoided conflict by swallowing your position, every time you agreed to avoid creating tension, every time you softened your tone to better fit into a conversation, a small, genuine part of you was left out. Not because someone directly asked for it, but because Libra learned very early on that being accepted requires adjustments, and that constant adjustments over time seem less like a sacrifice and more like second nature. This skill has a beautiful, almost generous side. You know how to welcome, how to adapt, how to make any environment lighter with your presence. People feel comfortable around you without knowing exactly why. But there's a side that's rarely told in this story, and it's this side that hurts the most. The better you become at accommodating others, the less space there is left to discover what you really think, feel, want when no one is watching. And that's why perhaps the weariness you feel today, looking back, isn't exactly about the person you lost. It's about the role you learned to play so well that you forgot it was a role. A role that earned you applause, acceptance, relationships that seemed to work, but that also, silently, distanced you from a version of yourself that perhaps even those closest to you never truly knew. There's a silent belief underpinning all of this, the idea that love and acceptance are scarce resources that must be earned through correct behavior. No one said this directly to you, but somehow you learned early on that being too genuine was risky, and that being too flexible was the price of emotional security. This agreement was never consciously signed, but it was followed to the letter, year after year. This weariness of playing a role that was never truly yours has a name, and there's also a way out of it. The divine path that guides your zodiac. Sign towards a life of purpose exists precisely for Libras, who have already realized that pleasing everyone comes at too high a price, and that true balance doesn't come from acting, it comes from within. It's an invitation to stop rehearsing acceptable versions of yourself and start listening to your own note, even without an audience. This material will be taken down soon, and the last copies are selling out fast. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Perhaps this person was never as special as you remember. Perhaps they weren't more interesting, more beautiful, or more intelligent than the others who passed through your life. And yet, the effect they had on you was unlike anything that came before or after. Why is that? The answer may be simpler and more uncomfortable than it seems. She wasn't the most amazing person you've ever met. She was the cleanest mirror you've ever had. A room where, suddenly, the light fell just right and revealed a face without retouching, without an edited version, without the mask you wear so well that you don't even realize you're wearing it anymore. Think about all your past relationships. In how many of them did you enter already knowing, almost instinctively, which part of you needed to be more prominent and which part needed to be kept hidden? You did this so subtly that it seemed authentic. But it was, in fact, a refined type of translation, you translating who you are into a language that the other person could accept without feeling strange. With this person, translation wasn't necessary, and it's precisely this lack of effort that confuses the memory so much. Because Libra is used to associating intimacy with adaptation. When someone appears demanding no adaptation, the brain doesn't know where to store that experience, and that's why it never really fades away. It stays there, somewhat loose, returning at random moments. You didn't just fall in love with her. You fell in love with your own image, finally visible, reflected in someone who didn't ask you to change any of that. And that's why losing her hurt so much. You didn't just lose a love. You also lost the only mirror where you could truly see yourself without the automatic filter you apply to almost everything else in life. And here lies the paradox that psychology explains better than any love story. Your longing is aimed at the wrong target. You think you miss her, but what you miss is the light that came through that specific window. Not the whole house, not the whole person. Just that exact beam of recognition that only appeared when the two of you were close. It's a common and profoundly human mistake. We confuse the light source with the light itself, and we spend years trying to get closer to a person, when in reality what we needed to recover was the feeling, the inner state, the permission to exist without editing anything. It's easier to blame someone's absence than to face the more uncomfortable question: why does this feeling of complete acceptance depend so much on external circumstances? Notice that this doesn't only happen with this specific person. Often, Librans feel a similar longing for phases of life, cities, old groups of friends, and, deep down, what they miss isn't the place or the time, but the state of mind that existed there, the version of themselves that felt freer, lighter, less watched over by imaginary judgments. The person becomes just the easiest label to hold on to this complex memory. The question that remains is not how to win that person back. It's how to rekindle that light without depending on the person who, unintentionally, once lit it. Because as long as the answer remains outside, in another person, in another place, in another time, Libra will remain hostage to circumstances beyond its control and will continue to confuse longing for itself with longing for the other. Noticing this mechanism is, in itself, a kind of freedom, because from the moment you understand that longing points inward, it ceases to be a prison waiting for someone's return and becomes a map that shows exactly what kind of presence, listening, and acceptance you need to learn to offer yourself in everyday life without depending on improbable reunions or emotional coincidences. Recovering that light without depending on another person is possible, but it requires understanding where it truly came from. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose addresses exactly this point. It shows how Libra can rediscover that state of true recognition on their own, without waiting for someone else to hold the mirror. It's about reclaiming the authorship of your own light, instead of outsourcing it to whoever comes into your life. This content may be removed at any time. The link is in the first pinned comment. There is a huge difference between a musician who relies on an external tuning fork to know if they are in tune and a musician who has trained their own ear enough to trust it. The first needs constant reference. The second can enter any room, even a silent one, and still know exactly where their true sound is. You spent most of your life being the first type, depending on other people to confirm if you were right, if you were okay, if you were being accepted. And there's nothing wrong with having learned that way. It's what ensured your emotional survival in environments where disagreeing seemed too dangerous, where drawing attention seemed risky, where being seen as incomplete seemed unacceptable. But there is another, quieter, slower way to build, training your own inner ear until you no longer need anyone playing the right note from the outside. This starts with small things, noticing without correcting yourself immediately when your opinion differs from the majority, sitting in an uncomfortable silence without automatically filling it with a phrase that pleases everyone. Noticing with curiosity and not guilt the moments when you find yourself adjusting your own behavior even before someone asks you to. Each of these small pauses is an exercise in reconnection. It's not about stopping being kind, sensitive, or collaborative. Those are genuine Libra qualities, not flaws to correct. It's about adding to those qualities a question that's almost never asked. What do I think of this before thinking about what others will think of me? This changes everything. It changes the type of relationship you attract, because people who only approach edited versions of you tend to distance themselves when you start showing your real side. And that, however scary it may seem at first, is a necessary filter. It changes the energy you have left at the end of the day, because maintaining your own level consumes much less energy than constantly recalculating the right level for each different person. And it changes your relationship with silence itself, which ceases to be emptiness and becomes space where finally you can hear yourself without interference. Training that inner ear, that self-confidence that doesn't depend on external references, is exactly the work that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose proposes. It's not about empty motivational techniques. It's about a real process of reconnecting with who you are when no one is around to approve or disapprove. For Libra, who lives so connected to the perception of others, this material works almost like a map back home. Access to this content is limited and may end without notice. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. In the end, perhaps the question was never why you can't forget that person. Perhaps the right question is, what do you do now that you know what that encounter revealed? Because she doesn't need to come back. She has already fulfilled the most important role anyone can fulfill in a Libra's life, proving, even if only briefly, that there is a version of you that doesn't need to adjust, translate, or edit itself to be received with affection. That version didn't disappear when she left. It just stayed, quietly waiting for someone who knew how to listen to it again. And that person could always be you, even if it took you so long to realize it. There is something profoundly beautiful about belonging to a sign that learns through pain to recognize its own harmony. Libra wasn't made to live eternally tuned to the sound of others, endlessly translating itself, measuring each word to fit into a mold that was never truly its own. It was made to, one day, find within itself the note that was always there, even when no one else was around to hear it, even when it seemed safer to simply repeat what others expected to hear. Perhaps you still think about that person from time to time. That's human. And it doesn't need to be fought as if it were a mistake. But the next time their name comes up in the silence, perhaps you can ask yourself, with the same gentleness you've always offered others, what exactly am I missing here? And if the answer points back to yourself, perhaps that's finally the right conversation to have. And perhaps that's why that name still resonates softly from time to time. Not because someone is missing, but because, in a silent and definitive way, something within you already knows how to return home and is just waiting for you to stop, listen, and recognize that path as your own. There is a specific beauty in signs that carry the weight of harmony as their mission. A beauty that is rarely celebrated, because from the outside it seems light, it seems easy, it seems that everything simply flows. Few see the invisible work behind it, the amount of silent decisions, accommodations, small internal negotiations that sustain this appearance of lightness. And perhaps it's time for you to start recognizing within yourself this work that has always been so undervalued, even by you.